Hello, good morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Akitunde Banjoko. I see you. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chahar Ahmed. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Okay, I can see that a lot of people have joined so far. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Good morning. All right, we're just going to wait for 4 more minutes for people to come in. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. Good morning. Good morning. I see James Ada. Good morning. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, everybody. We're going to give 2 more minutes for people to join in. Good morning. Good morning. Okay. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's been about 5 minutes, so we're going to start. I'm very happy to welcome you all to the very first Dun& Bradstreet webinar for the year 2026. Today is Wednesday, the 25th of March, and the time is 11:05. My name is Ola Dara Simpson, and I am a senior sales executive here at DNB Nigeria. We have our keynote speaker here in the house with us, Mr. Chukwudi Uche, who I'll be introducing shortly. Our topic for today is strengthening supplier relationships through transparency and data. But before we dive deeper into that, I'd like to lay out our guidelines for having a seamless experience. Please, I'd like us all to note that this webinar is being recorded and all lines are muted by default. If you have any questions at any point during the session, please type it out in the chat box, or you can use the hand-raising Zoom feature, and you'll be granted permission to speak if the time permits, or the question will be read out and answered. We will be sharing the recording of the webinar via email soon after the session is concluded. But if you have any further questions or you'd like to further engage with the speaker directly, please reach out to the email displayed on the screen, which is benjamino@dnbsame.com. That email again is benjamino@dnbsame.com. All right, to get started, I'd also like to welcome you all again, as well as the panelists with me. All right, to give you a brief overview about us, Dun & Bradstreet is a global business establishment. Our operations focus on risk management, compliance, business credibility, and governance. And with over 620 million business records in over 200 countries and territories around the world, it is no wonder that we're the leading voice in business data. Dun & Bradstreet was established over 180 years ago, and today I can say proudly that we have over 2 billion yearly updates to our global trade data. And now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker officially. He's a titan of industry and a leading voice in the procurement circuit. He is the Nigeria Country Director for the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, CIPS, and Chairman to the Advisory Board of a leading international school in Nigeria, a Chartered Fellow of CIPS, a juggernaut of procurement and supply chain processes, a pharmacist, and a project management professional with more than 2 decades of cross-sector experience. He has led major public sector supply chain reforms and is dedicated to transformative procurement for development. Ladies and gentlemen, here to discuss our topic, strengthening supplier relationships through transparency and data, I give you the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Chukwudi Uche. Mr. Chukwudi, please, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Oladara. And good morning, everyone. I'm really very excited to be here, especially with regards to the opportunity to talk to professionals within our space. And I believe we have professionals that are also outside our space that will find what we are going to discuss very useful. And permit me to go straight to what we are discussing this morning. And I will start with an icebreaker. Dara, I hope our participants are seeing the screen very well.
Yes, they are, sir.
Because it looks tiny from my side. Anyway, let me go ahead. Now, in discussing strengthening supplier relationships through transparency and data, we are starting with an icebreaker that is related to the topic. And it's all about if one of your top suppliers fell today, what will your current data have warned you? As in, would your current data have warned you early enough? And we have 2 options here. You choose yes or no, depending on your experience. And we'll just do this quickly and proceed further.
You can please put your answers in the chat box.
Well done. Right. And I'm going to speak through the few things I've put in the slide deck for today. And as I promised in the information I had put out earlier via LinkedIn, I'm going to be as practical as possible, and more especially sharing the experiences that I have gathered in the work we do within the Procurement Excellence Program that SIPS uses to strengthen organizations across the world. The first thing I have here is one statement I've been making of recent. And this is more of looking at the uncertainties that we are able to convert to efficiency. And I always say that the drivers of procurement are superpower when it comes to converting these uncertainties to efficiency must be relationship builders. And it's one thing to talk about being relationship builders. The other one is, how do we build these relationships in a very transparent way using data? And that's exactly what we're going to discuss this morning. Next slide. And in talking about supplier relationship, one thing I have highlighted in the definition that I have captured is the importance of maintaining appropriate, the word there is appropriate, relationships towards delivering organization's strategic goals or mandates. And as we discuss, we see why it has to be appropriate, because we have different suppliers and we can afford to have the same level of relationships with them. And this is where we see how to do that using data and being transparent also. Next slide. Here, what I want to tell us is this. When we look at managing relationships, and more especially from what we're going to see in the simplified procurement cycle that I have after now, we don't need to wait until when we need to carry out that exercise. The sources of it starts from all those things we need to do from the beginning before we get to the stage of supplier relationship management. And I'm going to use the simplified procurement cycle to illustrate what I'm talking about. Next slide. And if we look at the slide deck in front of us, I have highlighted where we have supplier relationship management. And the first emphasis is to say, we can't afford to do anything as standalone. And by the way, that is why the name is cycle. The interrelationships are very, very important. And just like what we are going to see when we start looking at data and what we are able to do with it, you will discover that some of the data we are able to use to manage relationships in the right way, we need to come from what we call upstream activities. By the way, talking about upstream activities is by looking at things from those that happen before the contract stage and those that happen after the contract stage. Like, for instance, if we talk about something like understanding the supply market, it happens early in the cycle. And if we don't understand the supply market very well, it becomes challenging to handle supplier relationship management very well. And the same thing applies to when we talk about performance management and the KPIs from there that we relate to managing relationships very well. Many a times we talk about procurement cycle, but we don't use it very well to make sure that we are very strategic in our approach when it comes to delivering on our mandates. Next slide. I will quickly talk about the key supplier relationship management activities, and from there, bring in the aspect of data. Now, the picture we have has been adapted from what you can find from vendorfood.com. And the most important thing here is where we need to start from, which the first thing is segmentation. Before we start looking at the kind of communication that needs to be in place, how we measure, how we want to be the customer of choice to our suppliers, and collaboration. Now, talking about segmentation, I will put a little emphasis around it, because what we have seen over time is we can have people with a lot of experience, information when it comes to understanding what needs to be done at different stages. But when it comes to the practical application, it becomes a challenge. And I'm going to use the little time we have to see how to do justice to that. And by that, I'll quickly go to the next slide, where I am going to talk about the useful data that will be relevant to us. The first here is the aspect of spend data, which is a function of things like the list of products we are procuring, the category of spend, the names of suppliers, the quantities, the prices, but more especially the supply risk. And I'm going to show us how to apply supplier risk to make sure that we have the right set of data to manage relationships. The next is the KPIs that we have from performance management that comes before managing relationships. And I'll quickly go to the next slide, and it will be to talk about some of the analysis that will really be very, very helpful. And I have listed 3 here. The first is Pareto analysis, which is very common. I'm not going to put a lot of emphasis, which is, in a very simple way, you can look at your suppliers, and in terms of impact or value, you can look at those that 20% of them will drive almost 80% of impact within your organization. And that tells you that you have to be very careful in managing those suppliers, different from the rest. Now, the next is ABC analysis. I will quickly give you an illustration of what it looks like, especially from this perspective. Now, here we look at things from inventory to value, that you can see the percentage that in terms of inventory might be about 10%, but in terms of value, they are driving about 70%. You can have the one that is 20%, but if you look at what is happening in inventory about 20, you look at the one that is 10%, but 70% in terms of volume. But how do we apply this in segmentation? I'm going to just use a simple example to illustrate this. Imagine you have a category of spend or products you're procuring. Maybe I can pick a few of them that you have done your spend analysis, and the total of it is just 10. I'm going to do this very quickly. Now, if that is 10, maybe one is 4 over 10. The other one is 3 over 10. You have 2 over 10. You have 1 over 10, in such a way that the total is 10. What that means is you can do a cumulation of your spend after looking at what they contribute to that 10, in such a way that the one that is 4 will be at 4. The next one will be 4 plus 3, which is 7. The other one will be 7 plus 2, which is 9. The other one will be 10 plus 1, which is 10. Now, when you take a percentage of each of them of the overall spend over 100, like for instance, the one of 4 over 10 over 100, it gives you a percentage, up to the last one that is 10 over 10 times 100, which is 100%. Now, by the time you do that accumulation and take the percentage, you can do from 1 to 70, which becomes your A. Between 70 to 90, it becomes your B. Between 90 to 100, it becomes your C. And what that means is, in terms of managing relationship and looking at things from segmentation, you can put more attention around the 70% that maybe even inventory perspective is about 10, but gives you more impact. Now, the interesting thing about the two when it comes to ABC analysis and Pareto analysis is that they have nothing to do with supply market risk, meaning that you can say this is the key suppliers you want to put more attention on in terms of relationship, but you've not looked at things from supply market risk. And that is why we always recommend category market positioning. And I will explain what this means. Now, when you bring in category market positioning, you are looking at the value of spend in your x-axis and supply market risk in your y-axis. Now, I will use a simple example that I always use to explain this, that when you are doing categorization, it's always good to bring it at the lowest level of existence in the supply market. And I will use a product everybody here can relate with, which is paracetamol. Imagine you are procuring paracetamol. You have the tablets, you have the liquid preparation, and you have the injection. And you can look at paracetamol that, okay, I have put everything together. In terms of overall spend, it's not contributing so much. And you feel that, okay, this is a lower category in terms of spend. But look at this. If you look at supply market risk, like in Nigeria, almost every manufacturer in Nigeria might be manufacturing tablets or the liquid preparation. But the injection, because it's something you inject into the body, the capacity to manufacture it is very high. Meaning that while you have about 200 suppliers in Nigeria manufacturing the other ones, when it comes to the injectable paracetamol, it might just be one or two. And what that means is, in terms of supply market risk, it shows you that it's very high, meaning that category market positioning has helped you to identify that this could be a bottleneck item with data. And this is what we always do for every category in such a way that you can look at it from the suppliers or you can look at it from the different categories you're managing. And what practical thing I can leave with you out of this webinar is this. From the work we have done over years, we have been able to establish a tough mark in terms of spend that just in few minutes, you can have an idea of what is happening, which is if you look at your spend and you look at about 7.5% of it, it will give you a cutoff from low to high. And by the time we go to the next slides, now we'll quickly use it to explain what I mean. Let's quickly take our poll before we do that. And the poll is, I've carried out suppliers segmentation in the past and used it for strategic supplier relationship management. We have yes, we have no, we have choose not to respond. Let's quickly go for it.
So there's a poll coming up on your screen. Please make your choice, and you have about 30 seconds to a minute to answer it.
I've carried out supplier segmentation in the past and used it for strategic supplier relationship management. You can choose yes, no, or choose not to respond. And let's do it quickly. I would want to ask you if it's something that I have the luxury of time, I would have gone further to ask whether you did like Pareto analysis, ABC, or category market positioning.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Now we quickly look at what you're able to get if you do such analysis, which I said is very, very important. Now, looking at the supply market risk, what we have from the left are the things that we are able to score. Like for any category of spend, if I use the paracetamol example that I gave, you will discover that when you pick the tablet, whereas the market complexity, time to switch, business impact, if there is any problem, is very low. Like if you score low, medium, high, for instance, you will definitely have that as low, because if Emzor is not there to supply you paracetamol, you have hundreds of them. But if you come to the injection I talked about, you discover that everything there becomes very high. That is how you can see that one product can exist at different levels. And this is where procurement professionals should be very, very careful, because it impacts on what happens when it comes to the kind of relationships that you are supposed to build. And we are going to see that. Now, what I have tried to explain before is many a times people wonder, how do you, especially from the aspect of spend, how do you get to the cutoff? Now, we have done a lot of work over years, as I said, that if you look at your spend and you just take, for example, 5% of it, you could use it to say, this is low, and from the mark is high, and you are able to quickly see where things fall. And the next slide is still talking about the same thing, but the essence of that is for you to see the similarities, whether you look at it from strategically important now, for instance, or you look at it from bottleneck, is looking at the same quadrant so that we don't have that confusion at any point in time. And I'll quickly go to, having done this or having understood what we need to do in terms of segmentation, how are we able to use that when it comes to relationships? Issues around transparency, data-backed relationships. And what this slide is telling us is the kind of focus that's going to the next slide, please. Yes. What this slide is telling us is, beyond the fact that we have done our segmentation, in terms of relationship focus, what are we able to consider? Now, what we have is that for the strategic suppliers, we need to look at things from long-term relationships, partnerships, regular risk management, which towards the end, you'll see where I'm talking about joint risk management, less tendering, because you rather put more attention in managing relationships as compared to doing regular tendering, because the supply market risk is telling you that you don't have a lot of these suppliers in the market. The other one is the bottleneck. That also tells us the kind of focus, but more especially while we are managing the relationship, the key thing is to look at how do we try to move things from that quadrant that is a bottleneck. The other one is the operational or leverage, which is where we need to take advantage of purchasing power. In this kind of relationship, issues around demand forecast becomes very, very important, meaning that we need to work closely with them to make sure that we take advantage of large volume to get a very good deal. The other one is the routine or transactional, where as much as possible, we need to automate things so that we don't put any a resource we don't have into that. We go to the next slide. Excellent. Quickly, I will talk about the kind of relationships we are able to bring to bear. You see, looking at the topic, we are looking at strengthening using data and transparency. And what we have done before now is to look at the kind of data that are important to us, as well as coming to where or how we can use the data. Now, we've used the data to do our segmentation, and what we have is showing us what we have gotten out of that segmentation and how we can bring about relationships. Now, if you look at from the left to the right, where we have routine to strategic, you look at things from competitive to collaborative. But more especially when you look at below, where we are talking about the relationship in terms of duration, as you are going to your strategic suppliers, especially from bottleneck to strategic suppliers, we need to establish long-term relationships. Now, if we look at trust, the same thing, trust has to be very high. We come to communication. Communication has to be what? Open. And what makes our communication open is that it has to be transparent. And this is where using data becomes very, very important, like linking the performance management KPIs to our supplier relationships. Using that gives us transparency. Open-ended communications is two-sided communication. We have to be free to share our ideas with our suppliers, our feelings, without feeling that we are going to be judged. And the last thing here is problem solving has to be joint. And especially for strategic suppliers, and this is me linking this to what is happening currently in the Middle East. If you have strategic suppliers, even before they hit, you will have worked with them to understand what could be the implication from risk perspective. Because for suppliers like that, you look at things up to tier 3 to understand what happens at that level, including where their raw materials are coming from. Time will not permit me to tell you a story of what happened last time, where a strategic supplier had an issue because of where they needed to get raw materials from. And the impact was very huge to the procuring entity because they were not able to understand that ahead of time. But the most important thing here is for us to understand the kind of relationships that we need to bring to bear. We go to the next slide. Now, the next slide is talking about beyond relationships, the importance of trust. And this framework is called the Marisako framework, which talks about 3 different types of relationship. Goodwill and different types of trust. Goodwill trust, competence trust, and contractual trust. Now, what I have done in this deck is to use that framework to embed it on the output of the segmentation that has led to understanding that we have different suppliers falling under routine to strategic. And this is telling us that for strategic suppliers, for instance, looking at things from bottleneck to strategic, that goodwill trust is very, very key. And, one beautiful thing about goodwill trust is this. Because you have a co-destiny approach, they can go out of their ways to support you as a procuring entity. The same way also you are able to go out of your way because that goodwill is there. You want to make sure that you succeed together at any point in time. Now, for competence, like for instance, where you have leverage, you need to do repeated tendering, you need to take advantage of volume to get a very good deal, you focus more on competence. And the essence of what we have in the aspect of trust or communication is this. And I always say this, we can talk about everything we want to do, have very good procurement strategy. But the most important thing is this, in implementation, what resource do you have to do that? Like, for instance, you can say, oh, all my suppliers from the beginning to the end. But the question is, you don't have all the resources to do that. And that is why, if you're able to start from like the bottleneck, the strategic suppliers with this understanding, it will make you to drive impact in your organization when it comes to supplier relationship management using data and then bringing about transparency. And I will quickly go to the next poll that we have. And this poll is saying access to use of digital platform will improve my supplier relationship management activities through data-driven decision-making and transparency. Is it a yes? Is it a no? Or do you choose not to respond?
Please, you have 30 seconds to answer or a minute, as we have time for spend.
Keep it coming. Keep it coming. I believe if we give everybody opportunity to respond to this, yes, we definitely be in the majority.
Yes, yes.
Yes. With that, I will quickly go to what I consider as a summary for good supplier relationship management in terms of the practices we need to bring to bear and looking at things from transparency. The first is the segmentation I've talked about. And the key thing here is we need to focus efforts where it creates more value. Please, this is very, very important because the demand from your leadership is that you are a value creator. And that is where we should focus resources on. The next is the KPIs we need to use. They should be what? Co-created. Yes, many a times you see procuring entities handing out KPIs for your strategic suppliers, for instance. It has to be co-created. And when you are talking about incentives also, it has to be performance-based. The next is, in terms of communication, we need to use every means possible to make it effective and timely. And this is where technology becomes very, very important. We can work with shared dashboards, especially for strategic suppliers, where in terms of our forecast, they are able to see it quickly. Others, they are able to see it quickly. Performance, in terms of management, we are able to use dashboards that can easily be assessed. This will make communication very effective. Now, technology will be at the center of driving all that we want to improve when we talk about data and transparency. And here, things like supplier relationship management portals are very, very helpful. Or you have ERP systems to use. But the most important thing is we need to ensure real-time visibility at all times. In terms of risk, we need to co-manage risk. I've said this before. It's very, very important. And in doing that, it means that we need to work together in sourcing those risks up to looking at how to mitigate against those risks. And more importantly, for strategic suppliers, look at things up to tier 3. If, for instance, you are an organization that is very interested in, let's say, you look at things from sustainability, and you are not interested in child labor and what have you, and you are not looking at what happens beyond tier one, you can get into serious reputational damage. The last here is provide opportunity for due diligence checks, verifications, audits, to do what? To preserve brand reputation. And the good thing is this goes side by side, which is you as a procuring entity, the suppliers you're working with, and this will ensure that we have business continuity. And on this note, it will just be to close with a quote, which is very straightforward. When we look at supplier relationships, we need to turn it to strategic advantage, which what we have seen before now is very clear to help us do that. It's not meant to be built only on contrast, but needs to be data driven with the needed clarity and insight, as well as the courage to be transparent at all times. And for some of us that you want to know more about SIPs within the partnership we have with Dons at Bradstreet, you can check us out at www.cips.org. And you are able to see all that we are known for, from being an awarding body to being a membership organization, what we do in the aspect of SIPs for business to strengthen the capability of organizations, but most importantly, our network. We are in about 180 countries of the world through our membership, and that gives us that footprint to continue to work for public good. And I will hand over to Dara at this point to take it from me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chukwudi Uche. That was such a riveting and engaging session. I'm so grateful that you gave us this much knowledge. And I really must admit that it really impacted me. And I'd like to also give a lot of kudos to the audience as well for being so interactive and responsive, taking part in our polls. And, you know, the energy was just very lively, and I'm happy about that. Thank you so much, Mr. Uche. That was very, very, very engaging. I really liked some points that Mr. Uche mentioned about good SRM practices. It really stood out to me because I think at the beginning of the session, when he asked the question with the icebreaker about if people had the data they needed at the very moment, a lot of people responded no to that question. So it gave me an insight that there was a need somewhere. And then further down during the poll session, when he asked if a source or a resource that could help meet that need, if people needed it. And a lot of the responses were so positive. So I'm so excited to let us know that we're engaging this, and people who need it, the people who we are talking to, are the people who actually need what we have here today. So I really appreciate Mr. Chukwudi for that. And I'd like to speak about VendR, which is the current platform that we're talking about. My first question, I'd like to ask a question is, what would you say is the ultimate goal of a procurement manager who wants to optimize supply chain life cycles? You know what, before we even go into that, let me just dial it back. Let me start by saying something we all understand. Every business, I believe, wants growth, but growth without structure, growth without a backing, that is where problems begin. Things like delays, mistrust, missed opportunity, and ultimately lost revenue. From many of the slides that Mr. Uche showed us, we could see that the work of a procurement manager is a Herculean task. It requires so much attention to detail. It is so vast. It requires knowledge of different types of analysis, different types of strategies to implement when you're researching, when you're making those business and financial decisions that could cost millions and trillions of naira, if we're being honest. So what I believe we need to talk about here is the ability to get control over your product and your supply chain life cycle. Imagine clarity, control, and confidence in every decision you make in your supply chain life cycle. Vendor is the platform that gives you exactly that. It takes you from chaos to control. It brings structure to what is often a very fragmented and chaotic space, and it is designed to open up access to wider markets, streamlining procurement processes and eliminate the costly disruptions that slow businesses down. At its core, vendor vendor does what is necessary. It brings an eagle eye view to your business. It gives you a vet and audit company so that instead of operating on assumptions, businesses gain full visibility and control. You are visibly seeing what you're controlling. You're no longer just guessing what you trust. You're not guessing who you're working with. You're not guessing who the partners are, or you're not even trying to do man on no man type of business. You know that you have verified and credible partners. And for our enterprise clients, the value is immediate and measurable. What vendor does is it declutters the complex databases, those CRM, FR, basically those acronyms that give you confusion and chaos, and it allows you filter exactly what you need by location, by product, company size, and so many more other options. But more than that, it gives you deeper insights, things like their diversity profile, their scalability, their overall capability, things that you will not find readily available, so that your decisions are not just fast, they're also smart and measurable. That is data, that is gold. And the results you get, faster procurement cycles, you get reduced risk, you get stronger compliance, and you also ultimately get better business outcomes. Your procurement cycle is reduced in time. That long, lugubrious process that you usually go through having to vet and verify your vendors, it is no longer that arduous process. Once vendor has come on board and taken off that off your table, you've reduced the risk of working with, I wouldn't say incompetent, but risky vendors. And the compliance is so strong because there is severe penalties to be faced for non-compliance. You gain access to a pool of pre-approved and thoroughly vetted suppliers while still maintaining the ability to properly scrutinize new vendors. Your efficiency improves and compliance becomes the standard. It is no longer a struggle and it's no longer a hit and miss. But the impact doesn't stop there. For vendors and suppliers, vendor is a game changer. It gives them visibility, real scalable visibility. Once you're onboarded on vendor, you're no longer just another business trying to advertise or trying to be seen. You are already strategically positioned on a platform that builds trust instantly. With a DUNS number and certification, credibility is no longer something you have to prove. It is something you already have because with that, you are certified as a DUNS business registered. Credibility becomes opportunity, the chance to work with globally recognized companies, scale faster, and refine your operations, and build a reputation that attracts not just clients, but future funding and long-term partnerships. One of the things I love that Mr. Uche mentioned was the necessity of building supplier relationships. So in building these long-term partnerships, you can therefore hope or you can therefore establish long-term business. And that is why many enterprise organizations already require the level of assurance vendor provides. We have companies like Walter Smith, we have Ikeja Electric, Seplat, and Aradale, and so many more. We have so many more that we've not listed here. So the question is no longer, how do I find the right partners? The question is now, how quickly can I start working with the right ones? Because when you remove the uncertainty of how to work, everything changes. Vendor removes that uncertainty for you. Your decisions become easier and your processes become faster. Your growth becomes predictable and measurable. And that is vendor promise. To wrap this up, I'd like to leave you with this. In today's business environment, the difference between a company that is struggling and companies that are scaling daily is no longer just opportunity. It is structure, visibility, and trust. And vendor gives you all three. Are you ready to move from uncertainty to control? Because that is exactly what Zendar makes possible. So at this point, I'd like to point out that after this meeting, there will be a quick survey. So please endeavor to take the survey. It's a short survey. It's not going to take too much of your time. I'd like to thank once again Mr. Uche for coming on board and giving us a wonderful, wonderful presentation. It was very engaging.